All that remains for us to do now is to add in the other stuff. If we look at the top here at our little chart, we've got column 3 and column 4. We've got the counter subject in the alto and subject in the tenor, counter subject in the tenor, answer in the bass, and continuing in the soprano part in the third column is some what I've called other stuff, just some additional counterpoint. And continuing the alto part from the counter subject here, again we've got some other stuff. That could be different counterpoint, or in fact it could be the same material transposed, in which case it would be like a second counter subject. So let's look at how we might go about this. I'll draw this score up a little bit to here, so you can just see the third and fourth lines, which corresponds to the third and fourth columns. And I'll pull this up again so we can see our chord chart, just to remind us of what the harmony is for each note of the subject and answer. What I'm going to do to begin with is just add in the missing notes from the chord, just to see what we end up with. So in here, this should be a D, and I'll just make it a minimum D. That's the missing note of chord of G major. The next beat, we're missing a D, so that's another D, missing another D, and in here, this second beat of this bar, we've got C, D and F sharp. The note that's missing from 5/7 is A, so we're missing an A there. The note missing here is D, make that a minim. And then over here, chord 5, the note we've got missing here, we've got the F sharp and the A. The note again is D that's missing, and D that's missing in the final bar. Now, there are a couple of problems with that. One is it's a bit dull, and the second is there are parallels buried in amongst the texture. For example, here we have a G and a D. It's a perfect fifth between the soprano and the alto part, and on the second minimum beat it goes to D to A, which is also a perfect fifth. So we've got parallels from here to here, and then back again to the G and the D here. So that's one problem. Another thing we might want to avoid is in this beat here. We've got chord 5, but as it appears just now, it's chord 5C. It's a second inversion chord, and second inversion chords are dissonant. We get away with this one because it acts like a passing 6/4, so it's like a passing 6/4 chord. But it may be we want to change it, and there will be other places when you're writing a fugue where you have just with the parts work you end up with a second inversion chord, and it'll need to be changed in order to make it work out harmonically in a correct fashion. So one thing we might do is, instead of chord 5, what we might have instead is chord 7 in first inversion. So F sharp, A and C. So rather than a D at the top, we could have a C. And that chord 7, is a substitute chord for chord 5. Effectively, it has a dominant function. It behaves in the same way as chord 5. The other thing we might do is just consider, rather than consider this just to be chord 5, we might consider it to be 5/7, which we can have in second inversion. So that's one solution, changing that to a C there. And again, at this end, we also have chord 5 in second inversion. Again, we might change this to C, just to get around that problem. So there we have it. You might be wondering, how do we solve this problem here of the perfect fifths, parallel fifths? One way around this would be to delay the movement to the A by one crotchet. Because we've got all these passing notes in here, and this is delayed, we won't actually feel the we won't hear or feel the parallels in the music at this point, nor will we really feel it coming back out the other side. In terms of creating a smooth line, we might actually say, okay, how about rather than going back up to the D, because we have a lot of D here, we're back to the D, back to the D again, back to the D again. It doesn't really feel like a nice line. Perhaps we could make this a B, so the line is a bit smoother as we come back towards the end of the phrase. We double the third here, but it's in the outer parts and it's in contrary motion, so that's absolutely fine in this case. We might also want to embellish this line a little bit. It works fine as it is, but we could embellish it. We'll listen to it once through as it currently stands, and then we'll consider embellishing it. I'll just draw this back down again so we can see the whole thing, and we'll just play from this point. Okay, so that's not too bad. What we might do is we might take this and say, okay, how about mirroring the counter subject to that point? So we've got some movement in thirds, and then we go to the C here, perhaps something like this. Make that a quaver, and we'll come back up in thirds. So we get our chord 5, and in fact not 5, but chord 7 at this point now, 7 in first inversion. So we've got a clear chord, and then we're passing back up through here to this point. We'll keep this as it is, quite like that motion coming through in the alto part, with the other stuff on the soprano part just high-ing there and then moving to the A. And something we might see if this works, we'll try here, is I was thinking perhaps we could mirror this bouncing motion here, make that a C, like that. So we get this mirrored here, sort of rhythmic imitation. So let's have a listen to that and see how that now sounds. Okay, so that seems reasonably okay. And what we'll do is we'll now look back at our chart. We've got our counter subject in the answer, in the third column, in the third line of the music, and that's going to become the other stuff in this bottom column here. So we had here a D in chord 1, which is the chord of G major, so the fifth of the chord. What we want to have in their alto part here is the fifth of chord 1, which is now in the key of D major. The fifth of chord 1 is an A. So we're going to do exactly the same thing, just copying it in exactly as we have here, just transposing it. So we've got our answer, counter subject to the answer, and our other stuff, which is actually a second counter subject because it's behaving, it's exactly the same as we have here in the third line of music. So let's just follow this through. It should be a crotchet. That needs to be a minimum. There we have it. So we've got our other stuff here, and then in this point here in the alto part here. And all we have to do is to just join this up a little bit. So we've got a D here, which makes its way along to a D here, and we've got a minimum rest. So we might do something like this, make this a minimum, make this a D. You can maybe tie that across to this D here, and then it comes down. So we've got a little bit of rhythmic interest creeping into fugal exposition now. The corresponding note is this alto note here in the third line. So we'll do the same here. And then it doesn't quite work in the same manner because the G there goes up to an A. In fact, we've got a G here. So what we might do is in this line, make that a B, just so we've got something slightly different. We don't have this G here repeated to a G here, and then another G here. We'll go to the B there. And if you remember, that's because here we had the answer going back to the tonic, so we've got the key of D going to G, which is effectively going up a fourth, and here we've got G going to D, which is effectively going up a fifth, so that's why we get this little discrepancy at this point. So let's go with that, and let's just listen to the whole thing so we get a sense now of how the exposition of this fugue is working. So there we have it, fugal exposition in 4 voices, subject, answer, going soprano, alto, tenor, bass, a countersubject which was originally fairly simple, which we embellished, then we added in a fairly straightforward additional lines for the other stuff, and then again we embellished those, and in the end it was more than just other stuff, we ended up with a second countersubject.